Yeah.
Excellent. And you know what? September is the month for topwater, especially for muskie.
Yes. So, it mainly focuses on pike and muskie because I noticed something recently on topwater strikes, specifically like spooks, stuff like that. So the regular tips you'll get for topwaters is often wait for the weight. You need to follow that because if you wait for the weight, that means that the fish has the bait in its mouth and now it actually hasn't engaged. A lot of time they'll come up, like we talked about before, like with frog fishing in the episode. They'll smack it, it goes flying, and don't set the hook obviously because it's not anywhere in their vicinity.
They just slap it.
Yeah. And another thing we've talked about before is like fishing spooks, topwater spooks for pike.
Yeah.
And it's fun, and they'll fly after the thing like 7 times before they even get it in their mouth. Now, what I've noticed recently is I was just actually back up at the cottage.
Nice.
And
so that's a lot of tips about slowing down, which is amazing, because a lot of people think like, oh, muskie, they're just voracious beasts that'll chase anything. It's like, that is true sometimes, but in the fall when the water's cold, they want things that are slow. So why is it so important for baits to go slow? We kind of talked to this before, but we always hear about fish, they're eating up for the winter. So you might think, oh, they're going to be aggressive. They're going to be, searching down for food and eating as much as possible. But they're not, because their metabolism shuts down.
Mm-hmm.
So as Corey mentioned, the fish's metabolism slows down. They're cold-blooded, like we mentioned, so their energy is impacted by the temperature. So they do want to eat, obviously, but they become sluggish. They have no choice. So that's why big baits and lures get the nod, because they're worth the effort for the fish to move. They're less likely to move for something small. So imagine this muskie sitting at the bottom and it's like, I got to eat up for winter, and a little tiny sunfish swims by. It's like, not worth the effort.
Mm-hmm.
But then all of a sudden it sees like a 2-pound walleye that's like, swimming like gimpy swimming by. And he's like, oh, there's an easy meal that's slowly moving by, and I can digest that like for a whole day. It's worth my while. That's why the bigger baits really get the nod.
Yeah, it's like you just had a great dinner at a wedding and you look like, oh, there's a dessert table, like, oh, like they have like a cookie for everyone. Like, am I going to get up and comfortable? But then you're like, oh, by the way, we just cut the cake and here's like a bunch of like slices. You're like, oh, I'm getting up for that.
Yeah, it's worth your while.
It's worth your while.
So anyway, these are great tips. Like I've learned a lot from these guys. I'm really happy that they gave us so much.
An improvement even in the statistics themselves of fishing those times of day.
Yeah, 100%.
You did.
Those times of day. Yeah, 100%.
I want that to come out of your mouth, but it did.
And I 100%. I was like, I got to stop halfway through saying this, but I just kept going. But I 100% agree with the whole moon phase thing. It does make a difference. His next tip, it may not be something that you've done yet, but if it is, he said hiring a guide. Hiring a guide, or fish with a friend that's knowledgeable with muskies, or fish with a fellow fisherman that's local to the lake and are interested in targeting muskies. There will be nothing more educational than getting out and fishing with someone that has experience. You soak in so much knowledge in a short period that you would normally take you basically a lifetime to figure out.
Yeah.
Which we actually talked about hiring a muskie guide this fall. It just didn't work out for us because we're poor. But if you can hire a guide, there are a phenomenal amount of guides in the Kawarthas. Like, we're going to give a shout out. Like, I've never used him personally. I've talked to a few people that used him. Bobby Belmonte from 2B Fishing.
Yeah.
He is he fishes a lot of lakes, but the Kawarthas, if you fish the Kawarthas, he is a muskie guy. A lot of guides, like, they fish bass and then they also fish muskie. Bobby does that, and he's a hammer.
But we need to preface this. Bobby, we hear he's good. If you want us to give an actual, review of what you think, then just take us out there. But
there's also
he is good though.
Goat angling.
Yes.
He fishes muskie a lot.
Yeah.
There's Kawartha angling charters. I forget the guy. The guy catches a lot of muskie. There's a lot of guides in the Kawarthas. And again, you can learn so much. And not muskie related, but I'll tell you, one time I was steelhead fishing. And I've been steelhead fishing my whole life. But I went out with this guy who's a hammer. An absolute hammer. And I fished with him for 4 hours. And I learned so much from this guy in 4 hours. Just little things. Like, I was doing the same thing as him, but he was doing little extra things. And fishing spots that I would normally not have fished. And I learned so much just from that thing. So that's the same thing. If you can't hire a guide, go with someone that's experienced. You'll learn a lot. If you just go out into a big lake and you're like, yeah, I'm going to go catch a muskie. Where do I start?
Yeah.
It's so intimidating.
Have fun.
If you pay, guides may be expensive, but if you pay a guide, maybe you go once or twice a year, or even once a year, you can learn so much that would have took you years to figure out by yourself. So, and these guys, like a lot of people are like, guides help you catch fish. They do, but think of it as a guide will educate you on how to catch fish yourself.
Yep.
You're not just paying to fish their spots.
You pick their brain with questions, they'll talk to you all day.
Exactly.
You get a lot for it.
So that is one thing about fishing with a guide. If you want to do that, I'd highly recommend
Yep.
it.
Another tip from Nate there is also first things first, he says, setting your expectations for an outing. These are apex predators and population density will be spread out much more than other sport fish. With that in mind, you will get chances if you spend time on the water.
And that's true, like we said, like say like per
Fish
acre.
have 10,000 casts.
Yeah, per acre, there may be like, I don't know, 100 bass in this acre. There's one muskie.
Yeah.
So just the fact that there's a lot less of them, your chance of catching one, like statistically, is going to be a lot lower than if you fish for a different species. So you have to just, like Andrew said, just keep casting, keep casting. They say it's the fish of 10,000 casts. For me, it seems like 20,000 sometimes. But, 100%. I agree. So where do you find these fall muskie? Now, I've heard from many experienced muskie anglers that I've talked to tagging muskie with like GPS chips. And they were like oh, throughout the year, this is where they are. And even in November, they were finding fish in like 3-4 feet of water. So if, say you're fishing out of a small boat or a kayak, and that's all you have, and you're fishing a bigger lake, and you're like, I only feel comfortable fishing on the shoreline, and it's later in the season, you can still catch them shallow.
Mm-hmm.
There's probably not as many fish, but don't view it as an impossibility. You can still catch them shallow. There just may not be as many fish as in the deeper areas.
Yeah.
But now we're talking about when it's getting cold.
Yes.
Insert cold effects. So Corey from Slump Bus Outdoors, he has a tip. Why don't you read that, Andrew?
Cold never bothered me anyway.
I had some requests for Andrew never to sing again, so we're going to cut that out.
So Corey says, as fall transitions and the water temperature cools, start to look for secondary break lines and fish that have transitioned to their wintering locations. Remember, bait is king. Muskies need the extra weight to make it through the winter. To find muskies, you need to find the bait. Once it's found, stick with the bait. Muskies will be around, and it may only be a matter of time until the fish will begin to bite.
That's a great tip. So like we're talking about where these fish are this time of year. And again, it's going to depend really on the type of lake that you're in. There's so many different lakes. Like there's shield lakes. There's lakes like we fish a lot of like shallow weedy lakes. And there may not be huge deep, break lines and stuff. You got to find out, depending on the body of water that you're on, where these fish are.
And that's a great tip for any species any time of year is if you're having trouble locating them, think of the food chain. Go to where the bottom of the food chain is. Everything else is going to that point.
Exactly. And he talks about secondary break lines. So a lot of people, they may not